by his keen awareness of the perils posed by the enemy's capabilities and the limitations to man and machine posed by Iraq's crushing heat, ever-present dust, and relentless desert winds, as well as by sheer human fatigue and endurance. As we advanced into Iraq in late March 2003, Steve came to be one of my principal go-to guys, and his unit, the only light attack and reconnaissance helicopter capability, 24 OH-58D Kiowa Warriors, in the division's armada of 258 helicopters, proved to be an invaluable asset throughout the push to Baghdad during our subsequent large air assaults to Mosul and our eventual counterinsurgency campaign in northern Iraq. When, for example, the mechanized infantry division that led the U.S. advance up the west side of the Tigris River reported to us that the landing zones we had selected based on a map reconnaissance and imagery analysis were too dusty to safely land helicopters, it was to Steve we turned. He and his assets launched rapidly, flew hundreds of miles to the locations we had designated, verified their suitability, and radioed back their assessment. And with that information, I decided that the launch of the first of our massive air assaults should go forward as planned. It succeeded. When, several days later during the Battle of Najaf, I needed to see the fighting for myself from a better vantage point than that afforded by standing on the hood of my Humvee and looking through binoculars, it was with Steve and his team that I flew over the battlefield, gaining invaluable perspective and a much improved sense of the situation on the ground as we whirled around in the sky at very low altitude to keep from being shot down. When, in each of our subsequent major fights, at Karbala and Hilla and beyond, we needed reconnaissance and attack assets ahead of or over the shoulder of our lead units, it was to our Air Cav squadron that we turned, and its aircraft often led the way for our 72 exceedingly lethal Apache attack helicopters, AH-64Ds, that tended to stand off while unleashing their arsenal of weaponry, which had greater range, accuracy, and explosive power than the weapons on Steve's light attack aircraft. Later, in the variety of different missions during our time in northern Iraq, it was to Steve and the intrepid aviators of the 2nd Squadron, 17th Cavalry Regiment, that we often turned for hunting the increasingly lethal insurgents, scouting various far-flung areas, and responding on short notice to developing missions. Indeed, it was flying in the left seat with Steve at the controls, this time over Mosul, that he and I encountered a substantial weapons cache being looted by possible insurgents, which Steve made short work of in the course of numerous plunging attacks, during which he fired our full load of rockets and machine gun rounds. It was also during that encounter that I learned how physically draining repeated high G-force dives, turns, and climbs in a helicopter were on one's body. While there were innumerable heroes of the battlefield, in the 101st Airborne during the offensive to Baghdad and the takedown of the Saddam Hussein regime, and then during the rest of our year in Iraq, Steve Schiller and his Air Cavalry men and women certainly stood in the front ranks of the groups that merited recognition, and Steve himself earned multiple medals for valor and combat aviation operations, as well as a Purple Heart. I was privileged to pin most of those on him myself. Through it all, Steve displayed a truly unique quality. Perhaps because of his background in special ops and his previous combat experience, he was more comfortable than most in responding to unexpected enemy situations. He also repeatedly demonstrated impressive initiative, creativity, innovativeness, and courage. And in some cases, he was also comfortable operating outside institutional norms, after conducting careful assessments of risk. The other aviators and members of 217 Cav broadly shared these qualities and demonstrated them repeatedly, as we recognized that the war in Iraq was steadily invalidating many of the assumptions and assessments made at higher levels before the decision to invade, and as the consensus emerged that serving in Iraq was all hard all the time. Several years later, after my 3-star tour in Iraq, it was Steve and the division's many other intrepid and creative leaders I had in mind when, among the 14 observations I distilled for an article published in Military Review, was observation number 13. There is no substitute for flexible, adaptable leaders.